Yeah, so, well, I will say a little bit about how we got here for those who are new. A couple of weeks ago, we've been looking at the sort of basis of the spiritual path in terms of what is the reason for practicing it. So what is our motivation? What is our aim in practicing the spiritual path? And then having looked at that, then we were looked at, well, okay, how am I going to get to this if this is whatever is my goal, so we had to clarify that first. Why am I doing this, and where do I want to kind of get to with it? But then we needed something that was going to help us to get there. So we constructed our spiritual compass. I might actually put that on screen in a moment so that you can see it. But we created this together, and it's kind of like our own substitute or equivalent of, I mean, there are many within Buddhism, there's the Four Noble Truths, there's the Six Perfections, there's 4 of this, 5 of that, 7 of the other, and we got our own set of 7 actually. Maybe I'm going to just see if I can quickly find that and put it on screen, if you give me a moment, actually. Okay, here it is. This is our spiritual compass that we created. So we created that 2 weeks ago, and you can see in the center, compassion and wisdom. So this is the heart of the spiritual path, especially compassion, but both together. It's the wise compassion and compassionate wisdom, if you like. That is what this path is really all about. And then, some of the elements, some of the factors that are involved in those. So vertically, we have connection and courage relating to compassion. And then horizontally, we've got commitment and concentration relating a bit more to wisdom. But obviously, all of them, they all relate to each other. And then I didn't quite know how to do it around everything, but awareness is kind of like the container of everything. So those are some of the qualities that we're looking at over the next few weeks. So last week we looked more at compassion. And last week I was relating this to because I am actually, I'll be upfront, I'm relating it to the 6 perfections. So we're going to look at some of those. So the first one is generosity. And generosity and compassion very closely connected. Compassion is the desire to relieve, to free others from suffering and bring them to happiness. And so that is really the deepest kind of generosity. We can give material things, but really, if we want to give on a deep level to anybody or any living being, what we most deeply want is for them to be free of suffering, all forms of suffering, which means, not being lacking for anything that they want. Okay. Maybe qualify that, anything that they want that is good for them, because we can want things that are not good for us. So we can have mistaken desires, but we can also have valid ones. So giving, generosity, and compassion, very much in essence the same thing. But also another aspect of compassion is this element of connection. And without that, our compassion is very limited, really. If we if I experience myself as completely separate from someone else, then my attempt to manifest compassion towards them will not be the most effective, the most meaningful. It's when we have that deep sense of connection that we feel, a closeness to somebody, that we have a sense of a sense of what it is that they're experiencing. And if they're going through some suffering, we feel that suffering authentically. We have a real sense of what that is like for them. And therefore, coming from that place, we are more able to offer them something that will help. Often, just listening in that spirit, with an open awareness, allowing that other person to be themselves and to be heard and to be seen as what they are. So you can see that awareness comes into that as well. And wisdom comes in, because when we speak about wisdom, from a Buddhist point of view, the most important aspect of wisdom is to free ourselves from the confusion, the ignorance. And that takes the form of actually the ego, my sense of being this separate self that is inherently real from its own side. So we'll be looking at that in some detail later on, but we can see all of these things kind of come together. But here I wanted to look at this aspect of connection and interdependence. And I'm relating it, in terms of the 6 perfections, I'm relating this to the second one, which is called moral discipline or ethics. And so how does connection relate to ethics or moral discipline? Well, in Buddhism, the first kind of category of moral discipline, if you like, there are different kinds. So the first kind, which is really one of the primary teachings of the Buddha, is non-harming. The one thing that the Buddha does require of, if someone is a follower of the Buddha, wants to be a follower of the Buddha, the Buddha said, if you want to be my disciple, my follower, then you should not harm anyone. That's the first commandment of Buddhism, not to harm. So you can see it's extremely obvious, isn't it? When we fully appreciate the connection, how completely we depend on others, how completely interwoven my life is with the life of every other living being, then how could I justify harming anyone else intentionally? I mean, obviously, accidentally, it's kind of bound to happen from time to time. But in terms of, what is the most important rule for me to follow in my behavior, to not harm others, to not cause others suffering if I'm able to avoid it. So, of course, all of the points of the traditional Buddhist ethical teaching, which is mainly the avoiding the so-called the 10 non-virtuous actions, so the Cardinal Sins. um, well, Buddhism doesn't, you very seldom find the word sin in Buddhism, actually. Maybe in older translations, sometimes you would find it. But the concept of a sin in the way that we understand it in the West from our kind of Christian background, also some Muslim and Jewish, I think similar, um, that idea doesn't really have a role to play in Buddhist thinking. But these actions that are called non-virtuous, sometimes it's translated, interesting translation, unskillful actions. All of them actually very obvious that the reason why they're called that is because they cause harm, they cause suffering. So killing others, which includes in any form of violence, actually. And it's not only killing human beings, it's killing animals as well, taking the life of a sentient being. And there can be, overriding circumstances. From Buddhist point of view, these principles, these guidelines or commandments, whatever you want to call them, they're not absolute prohibitions. It's one way it differs from the idea of a sin, as it's often taught in some other traditions. That you just can never do this. Well, if, of course, because we're also as Buddhists, we believe that death is not the end of any being's existence. They will have a subsequent rebirth. So there can be situations where it can be compassionate to take a life, to be very, very, very careful about that. But it's not an absolute principle. Stealing, taking others' property, same. It causes harm. It causes suffering, to that individual. It also causes harm to the society, doesn't it? Because if in society people's personal property is not respected, then we can't live, a decent life. We very much depend on having certain things now. We don't necessarily have to have 90 Rolls Royces, as somebody somebody once told me, oh, my guru has 90 Rolls Royces. And I thought, I wonder if he really needs all those. But nevertheless, it doesn't justify, stealing them necessarily. I don't know. We could have an argument about that if you're a socialist. But generally speaking, we have the things that we have for a reason, and we need to rely on being able to keep them. Sexual misconduct. Again, this is not a matter of some list of actions that are inherently sinful. That's not the point. The point is sexual behavior of certain kinds can cause tremendous suffering, emotional suffering. Tremendous emotional suffering. So in that department of our life, we need to be very careful and considerate of how our actions are going to affect others. Even if we think, oh, this person shouldn't have jealousy, that's not the point. If we know that what we're doing is going to cause suffering, sometimes, great suffering to someone else, then don't do it, in general. So then those are the bodily actions, actions of speech. lying, very obvious how that undermines trust. And in many, it's just so obvious how these things cause suffering. Slander, bad-mouthing people, basically saying what's wrong with others behind their back, causing dissent between people, causing disharmony, harsh words, saying things, which are simply words that hurt. Words can hurt. There's a saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. But we all know that words can hurt more. This one's a killer. Idle gossip or senseless chatter. Just talking without any mindful awareness of what you're saying. Why is that a problem? Simply because you automatically run the risk of all of the other three. Okay. Then the three of mental actions. And these are the worst, actually. All the others, in certain circumstances could be done with a good motivation. Any action of speech or body or speech, you can think of a situation where you would do that with a positive motivation, that it would actually, not cause suffering, but or it would bring more benefit than it would cause suffering. But the three actions of mind is not possible. So it's ill will, wishing harm to somebody, wishing someone to be harmed. Extremely bad for your own mind, your own well-being. Covetousness, wanting to get the things that belong to others, not being satisfied with your own, what you have, what your karma has brought you. So I'm going very much into traditional Buddhist ideas there. But whether or not we think in terms of karma, to have contentment with whatever a kind of material level that you have is very positive. Assuming that you're not actually starving, that's of course something like that. Those kind of really severe physical problems is one thing, but not having very much money, or not having a very big house or that kind of thing, causes people immense amount of suffering because they feel they should have more, or they worry, generate anxiety. What if I lose this? But actually, that doesn't make it. How much you have doesn't actually make that any less. It makes it more. The more you have, the more anxious you will become about losing it. And wrong view, mistaken understanding of reality. Not just any belief that happens to be factually mistaken, but things like, a good example is racism. That's a very good example of what is meant in Buddhism by a wrong view. Yeah. Belief that people of a different race are inherently inferior or inherently bad or something. Completely no basis in fact. It's a prejudice, a mistaken idea that again has to do with identifying me as other than you, separate from you, different from you on a fundamental level. Of course, we're different from each other in our characteristics. Some are young, some are old, some are men, some are women, some are, whatever color of the rainbow, different religions, beliefs. So all of these differences, huge numbers of differences, but fundamentally, we're not divided into people over here who are like me and people over there who are completely different. But those, whether they're conscious beliefs, but they're viewpoints that influence people's thinking and people's actions. Okay. So I'm going to give a much more traditional Buddhist presentation here than I have in any of the previous talks. However, you know, the reason for avoiding too much Buddhist jargon was mainly because some Buddhist ideas, like especially rebirth and karma, you know, don't fit so well into our contemporary worldview. So that was the main purpose. And now, you know, I think also because I realize I might have been straying a little bit too far from the conventional presentation, and maybe, you know, I want to kind of make clear there's a relationship between what I'm presenting here and the traditional Buddhist teachings. But with these ethical principles, I think there's nothing in there that is a cultural idea that doesn't make sense in our society, nothing whatsoever. These are universal. The fact that we're human beings means that those actions cause suffering, pain, and cause harm to others. So this is the foundation. In many ways, it's the foundation of all our practice, you know. If we are still habitually doing those kind of things, we'll never make satisfactory progress on the spiritual path, because we're continually creating havoc in our life, inner and outer havoc. Whether or not we think we're going to get away with something, you know, outwardly we might get away with it, but inwardly we'll never get away with it. Inwardly, you know. And if you don't recognize a mistaken action as mistaken, then it will eat away at you. You know, it eats away at your inner mind. So these, you know, these guidelines are very, very important. I sometimes think, you know, people can get over obsessed by them, you know, like get, you know, we can't help sort of taking the lives of quite a few insects as we go about our daily business. And we could get terribly, terribly anxious about that. That's not really the point. The point is that we, you know, in Buddhism especially, is that we cultivate a mind, a mental disposition, an attitude that wants to take care and, you know, cherish life, cherish the lives of others, and cherish their well-being, and want to avoid giving them suffering and harm. But, you know, we have to be realistic as well. Can't. It's interesting actually, because the Jains, some of them go to very extreme lengths to avoid any killing, even of insects, even of microbes. Some of them, they don't wear clothes because to make clothes it does involve, you know, a certain amount of killing. That, you know, that when you're raising the cotton crop, insects have to be killed and so on. Even if it's organic and whatever, not using insecticide sprays. In the harvesting, the insects are going to get killed and so on. So they, I don't know if they've worked out how to eat without any killing being involved. They wear a mask so that they're not breathing in microbes and killing the microbes. And they have a little brush that they sweep the path, so they sweep away any insects. And this has been explained. I mean, if there's any Jains here that can correct me, but I understand that this is because their attitude they have pretty much the same set of moral precepts as in Buddhism, but they have a more literalistic kind of interpretation that it is the actual killing. It's not, whereas in Buddhism, it's the mind behind it, the motivation, your intention, your attitude of compassion and loving kindness. And your actions stem from that attitude rather than getting very, very, very hung up on the tiny details of the external action. Right? So this is why I began with this meditation on interdependence, because if we integrate that kind of awareness into our mind, then these principles just follow naturally. We don't need to have any rules, actually. If our mind is imbued and soaked with this understanding and awareness of interdependence and connection, we naturally will not do anything that harms another being. And conversely, we will also do actions that benefit them. So this is a second kind of morality. All right, going back into the traditional sort of categories, there are three kinds of moralities. The first one is called the morality of restraint. You know, what are the things to avoid doing? And in a simple, simple two-word phrase, it's harming others. We avoid harming others, and we practice benefiting others. Okay. So this comes back to actually the practice of generosity. And again, it grows naturally out of this sense of connection and interdependence, that others are exactly the same as me, and everything I receive in life, my whole being, my very existence, my body, my food, my ability to speak, my ability to think, all these come from others. Of course, I have a consciousness, I have a mind, yes, but in order to use that mind intelligently, I need to learn things. I need teachers. I wonder, ever try the exercise of thinking about what would I know and what would I understand if no one had ever taught me anything? I'd never had, I mean, you'd have to imagine really that you've never seen another human being. Even then, maybe the animals would be able to teach you something, but not wouldn't compare quite, would it? So what we owe to others, if we understood that fully, we couldn't dream of harming anyone, and we would feel moved to want to, give them everything. So I'm just quickly on giving. This is supposed to be from last week, but I didn't really talk about this, so I'm going to follow this structure now. A bit more of the 6 perfections, I think. My decision. So giving, so traditionally there's 4 kinds of giving. And the first one is material things, well, that we understand, we know. If someone needs food, clothing, anything like this, then we can give. Or even if they don't absolutely need it, give them nice things or Christmas presents, whatever, it's all good. But that's kind of like the base level, really, isn't it? Then more important than that, giving love. So what does that mean? I mean, again, I think at its simplest, it's very similar to what I said before about giving generally, that to just be with someone with an open heart, with an open mind, allowing them to be who they are, listening to what they have to say, which need not be in words, actually. Sometimes we can sit with someone in silence and they can be very eloquent. Just expressing who they are just by their presence. And if I am able to receive that, if I am able to have a quiet mind and some awareness, recognize the presence of that other person, the fact of their awareness, the fact of their, being a living being, a conscious being. That's all that's needed. If our ego, my kind of obsessional, me-centered thinking isn't getting in my way, then what arises naturally is love. And so that, just being connected in that way is one way of giving love. There are many ways of giving love. Many, many ways of giving love. Showing that you care, you truly care about the other person. Giving fearlessness, the third one. In other words, some kind of protection. Or if someone is feeling afraid, talking to them to, maybe dissolve their fears if their fears are a little bit unreal. In whatever way we can to take the fear or anxiety away. That is a wonderful form of giving. And then the last one is called giving the Dharma, giving the teachings of how to live in such a way as to move away from suffering, anxiety, fear, confusion, towards fulfillment, understanding, joy, wisdom, and compassion. Teaching those things, very, very deep form of giving. This is said to be the best. Of course, first we have to learn it. So we have to practice. What do you practice? What you practice, you will get very good at. So yeah, practice being aware of interdependence. Because out of that grows the compassion and the loving kindness. So the third kind of morality as well. And this I think I'm going to talk about a little bit differently from how it's talked about traditionally. Yeah. So we've connected, so when we think about compassion and kindness and so on towards those beings who are suffering more than we are is one aspect. So to think about the plight and the condition of people who are suffering is very important, and to think about maybe things that we can do. So in these we have a festival of kindness and compassion and well-being coming up in September. You may not have heard about it yet because the plans were a little bit on hold because of the pandemic situation, but it will be going ahead. And so we're going to be, looking to have a conversation with the city about how can we all help each other? How can we help the people that are suffering, the people that are struggling, the people that are lonely, the people that are depressed, the people that are in poverty, etc., etc. It's a very important aspect, isn't it? So we need to relate to those who are not as fortunate as ourselves. We are connected to them. We need to practice for them. We also need to practice for those who are on the same level, the people that we're especially connected to, our family, work colleagues, people that we come into contact with. And then there's a third category, the people that are more fortunate, or rather, the people that are closer to that goal of where we are looking to get to on our spiritual path. So he talks about the human potential, what a human life can be. There is such a thing as, true fulfillment, a truly meaningful, worthwhile kind of life that exists. And there are some people who are examples of that. And also there are, teachings given by such people, but also, they're not just teachings that have been given by certain people, but they are actually universal truths. They're true whether or not anybody taught them. So the Buddha emphasizes very much, the Dharma, this is not my teaching, This is how things are. This is just how things are. So in Buddhism, there is also this sense of what's our relationship to those people, the Buddha, or the teachers, those who have realizations, those who have actualized their human potential on a very deep level. So we think about people like His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Maybe think about people like Gandhi or, other great human beings. The Buddha was asked, what in those days, of course, there would be a sort of, the way it's translated anyway, whether it was in the original, is a slight gender assumption here. Maybe there isn't in the original Pali or whatever. But he was asked, what is a great man? Right? When does one become a great man? And the Buddha said, with a liberated mind, one is a great man, a great woman. When your mind is free of the ignorance, the confusion, the self-centered attitude, the point of view that sees oneself as separate from all others, when one is free of that mistaken perception, then one is a great man or woman. Right. So this is the goal. It's called enlightenment, and again, that has many associations. So I haven't used that word very much, but I prefer to use the human potential. And I'm not sure if there's an end point, but clearly there are people who have realized their potential to a very, very much greater extent than I have, for example. So how do we connect and relate to those people? Well, so if they are the example, if they are showing me the direction I want to go in, then I think actually probably just being mindful of that. I mean, I spend a considerable amount of time every day, and it's part of my practice, thinking about that relationship to my teachers, to the Buddhas, and so on, and the teachings, and cultivating an attitude of deep respect and trust for them, because that's what, that's the direction I want to move in. So that's also said to be part of the practice of morality, actually, which is, it's like positive behavior, isn't it? Moral discipline or ethics. Positive behavior, cultivating ways of acting and living and being and thinking that are beneficial to oneself and to others. So just coming back to, where we started with connection. So there's many, many teachings about ethics. For example, the monks and nuns, the monks have 253 vows that they have to keep. The nuns have even more, 365 vows. So it can get very complicated if we think like that. What are all the rules that I need to follow so that my behavior is okay? But if we just remember this one thing, that without others, I would have nothing. I wouldn't even be able to be alive. I could never have been born. I couldn't exist without others. I depend on others. Absolutely, for everything. If I remember that deeply, then I can never act in a negative way towards others. So this is why I'm going to make this recommendation that for each of you to, whether you can use the meditation recording, or maybe you don't need to do that. Just however you want to do it, for 10-15 minutes every day, as a sitting meditation, as a walking meditation, however you want to do it. But spend at least 10 minutes every day reflecting, thinking about, how do I depend upon others? How am I connected to others? How is everything interdependent? And just see how that influences your actions.